Writer's note. The characters in this story are not based on real people I know, but are inspired by stories I've read, watched, and lived through, especially those centered on young love and unrequited longing. In a world shaped largely by straight narratives, queer audiences are often told that our feelings are lesser, that our love is just a phase, a crush, an inconvenience, or something we should outgrow quickly. Mainstream media repeatedly sidelines LGBTQIA+ desire, treating it as unworthy of focus, time, or resolution. Our unrequited love is expected to be endured quietly so that straight love stories can thrive, reach fulfillment, and receive the happy endings we are so often denied. No one should regret being queerbaited by a TV network, book, or mainstream film. You were never foolish for hopping. So many people, LGBTQIA+ viewers and straight viewers alike, were watching right alongside you, holding their breath, believing that this time the writers and producers would honor what they promised in the subtext, the song lyrics and individuals' body language, the character development, and the marketing that invited us to believe in fulfillment but then purposely let us down. Even if our ship is never reciprocated, never canonized, never confirmed aloud, what we experienced was still real. The love we felt as viewers, the attachment, the longing, the recognition, was meaningful and beautiful. That is not erased just because the ending failed us. I will never stop caring about the characters and stories that moved me, even when their conclusions betray the very people we loved them for. And I will never give up hope simply because those in power choose fear over honesty and bow to a strict agenda. Loving deeply was never the mistake. Silence was. I've known and met dozens of queer people who experienced unrequited love at every age. I've also seen a surprising few find happiness with someone they might never have pursued if they had listened to the voices telling them to stay quiet, to stay small, to accept ambiguity instead of hope. Too often, queer relationships are left unresolved, implied, or erased entirely, while straight couples are granted clarity, commitment, and closure. Regardless of how your feelings turn out, whether love is returned or remains one-sided, don't let straight-centered narratives or internalized fear convince you that your love isn't worth pursuing. Don't let them tell you not to fight for the person who catches your eye, whether that's a boy, a girl, or someone in between. The only love truly not worth having is the one you never allow yourself to explore. This novel explores a deeply intimate bond between two close childhood companions, one straight, one possibly queer, and examines what it means to love without guarantees. It explores both the hope of romantic connection and the ache of long, drawn-out, one-sided, unrequited love. Friendship in this story is not portrayed as a consolation prize or a lesser form of love, but as something powerful, formative, and worthy of devotion and respect. Love takes many shapes, all of them matter. And all of them are worth fighting for, even when the person you love doesn't reciprocate or love you back. It's the journey and the friends you meet along the way, not the destination, that make love worth every sacrifice and every heartache. Noah's POV 1986. Tate Blue freaking loved me, he just wasn't in love with me. I truly believe that. Tate loved me. He wasn't in love, not in the way people thought of love. His love was something fiercer, ferocious, and more consuming than anything I'd ever experienced. It was passionate, constant, jealous, possessive, territorial, fiery, obstinate, and completely sexually chaste. He loved to touch me, but it wasn't sexual. Tate Blue adored Noah Lunis. Looking back years later, nobody in either family could quite explain how it had happened. There was no grand event, no dramatic rescue, and no single life-changing conversation that bound the boys together. Nothing anyone could point to and say, that was the moment it began. It was simply two little boys meeting in a preschool classroom in 1972, both too young to understand that something ordinary was quietly becoming important. Yet somehow that small, unremarkable beginning would shape nearly every year that followed. Tate Blue was a remarkable child in ways adults noticed immediately. He was confident without being shy, curious without being cautious, and carried a kind of certainty that made people laugh and sometimes pause. While other children hesitated at the edges of new experiences, Tate walked straight into them, assuming the world would make room for him. Most of the time, it did. He came from a wealthy family whose name was well known in the community. The Blue household was large, comfortable, and filled with more space and possessions than any one child could ever truly need. Expansive rooms, polished furniture, a swimming pool, a game room, and shelves of toys made up the backdrop of his childhood. To Tate, none of it felt exceptional. It was simply the environment he had always known. Money, for him, was not something to desire or chase. It was just there, constant, unremarkable, and background to everything else. What actually held his attention was people. For many years, Noah and Tate were closer than brothers in all the ways that mattered to them. Their relationship formed quickly after Noah's first afternoon at the Blue House, when what was meant to be a simple visit turned into something that neither boy fully expected to repeat so often. Tate had a large, quiet home and an only child routine that often felt still and empty. Noah, who came from a very different home life across town, found something unfamiliar but comforting in the structure and space of the Blue household. The mansion itself felt almost unreal to him at first. An expansive 5-level Victorian-style home filled with long hallways, wide rooms, and staircases that seemed to lead everywhere at once after the family had moved there in the early 1970s. Over time, visits became more regular. Afternoons together turned into shared routines, and shared routines turned into a steady childhood friendship that followed them through school years. Though they came from very different worlds, what held them together was simple. They liked being around each other, and in a world that kept changing, that familiarity became something they both returned to again and again. After Noah's first afternoon at the Blue House, Tate talked excitedly about him for days afterward. He kept bringing Noah up in conversation, small details about what they had done, what they had laughed about, and how quickly the afternoon seemed to pass. Talia noticed immediately how strongly Tate had bonded with the blonde rascal Tate brought home in preschool. When Noah visited again, she welcomed him easily. There was something about the quiet, thoughtful little boy that made the house feel a little fuller in a way she hadn't expected. Over time, Noah became a frequent guest at the Blue home, spending afternoons and weekends there as arrangements were made between both families. Talia found herself growing fond of Noah. She treated him with the same care and attention she gave her own son, and in many ways Noah became a familiar presence in the household. Another child at the table, another voice in the living room, another pair of shoes by the door. Noah's home life was different and often busy, with his mother working long hours to support the family. Because of that, the Blue household became a steady place for him to spend time after school and on weekends, where he could do homework, eat meals, and simply be a kid in a quieter, more structured environment. What began as a simple friendship between two preschool classmates slowly grew into a shared routine shaped by both families, one that gave Noah stability during the day and gave Tate the companionship he naturally gravitated toward as they grew up together. For the first 14 years of Tate and Noah's relationship, they were as close as two children could realistically be. People around them often described them as inseparable, and it wasn't an exaggeration. Wherever one appeared, the other was usually nearby, walking the same hallways, sitting at the same lunch table, boarding the same school bus, and drifting through childhood with a shared rhythm that became second nature. They spent most of their time together. After school, they would end up in the same rooms, working on homework side by side or getting lost in whatever game or music had captured their attention that week. They built their own routines without thinking much about it, shared jokes, familiar habits, and the kind of comfort that comes from knowing someone so well you don't need to explain yourself out loud. To the adults in Tate's family, the bond often looked almost twin-like. They moved through spaces together so naturally that it was easy to forget they were two separate households, two separate lives. If you saw Tate, Noah was usually just a step behind him. If you saw Noah, Tate was almost always within reach. It wasn't that they never interacted with anyone else, it was that, over time, their relationship became the constant in both of their worlds. Everything else shifted around it, but the two of them remained steady, growing up side by side through the years. When school would get out, it became almost automatic for Noah and Tate. They were usually together as the final bell rang, moving through the hallways side by side, gathering their things at the same pace before stepping out into the afternoon air. Over time, it became normal for Noah to spend a lot of time at the Blue house after school. The arrangement wasn't unusual to the adults involved, it was simply a comfortable routine that both families had fallen into. Noah would head over with Tate, sometimes walking, sometimes riding along depending on the day, always moving into the familiar rhythm of their shared afternoons. The Blue house became a regular setting in his life, the backyard pool on warm days, the living room when it was cooler, and Tate's room when they wanted quiet time. Noah especially enjoyed those quieter hours. He liked reading, often spending long stretches with comic books and stories about superheroes and animated worlds. Tate would be nearby, sometimes doing his own thing, sometimes watching or joining in, but always part of the same space. Noah and Tate shared almost everything in the way children often do when a friendship becomes central to their daily lives. They spent most afternoons together, wore similar styles when families coordinated clothes or handed down items, and naturally fell into shared routines that made their days feel connected. There was also a clear difference in their home lives that neither of them fully understood in adult terms, but both felt in small ways. Noah's household often struggled financially, and there were times when things were uncertain or stretched thin. Because of that, the Blue household became a place of stability for him, somewhere he could come after school, have regular meals, and spend time in a warm, consistent environment. Tate noticed the practical differences early on, even if he didn't have the language for them. Instead of treating Noah differently, he responded in a simple, childlike way. He shared what he had. If Noah needed a coat in winter, one was there. If he needed clothes for school or play, Tate's family made sure he had what he needed without making it feel like charity. What mattered most to Tate wasn't the imbalance others might have seen, it was that Noah was there at all. He never framed it as luck in terms of wealth or status. In his mind, having Noah around made the house feel less empty, less quiet, and more complete. It wasn't that Noah had stopped having his own life or interests. It was simply that over time, the Blue household had become one of the places where he felt comfortable and at ease after school, surrounded by routine, familiarity, and the steady presence of his closest friend. Tate made sure that Noah was aware of how lucky Tate felt because Noah was in his house. Tate never wanted Noah to feel like he was a charity case or the family pet. He wanted the blonde to know that Tate was the one who was lucky to have Noah in his life, and that Noah was more special to Tate than anyone in the community could have dreamed or speculated about. From 1972 to 1986, from the time Tate and Noah were 4 years old until they turned 18, their closeness became one of the defining constants of their lives. They grew up side by side, through classrooms, playgrounds, school projects, holidays, and long stretches of ordinary days that somehow always ended with them together. Over the years, their bond stopped feeling like something they had to maintain and started feeling like something that simply existed, steady and familiar, no matter what else changed around them. They learned each other's habits without thinking about it. They knew how the other reacted to frustration, excitement, boredom, or quiet moments. When one was present, the other naturally adjusted to match the rhythm. Friends came and went through school years, but Tate and Noah remained each other's constant presence, often prioritizing time together without needing to discuss it. By the time they reached the end of high school, it had become difficult for most people in their lives to imagine them separately. Their friendship had lasted longer, deeper, and more consistently than most childhood connections ever did. But 18 has a way of changing things. Change happens suddenly, not always in obvious ways, but in the quiet pressure that comes with adulthood beginning to press in from every direction. New expectations, new decisions, new spaces where childhood routines no longer fit as easily. And for Tate and Noah, something in that transition began to shift in a way neither of them had fully prepared for. Not an ending. Not exactly. But the start of something different, something neither of them had seen coming, even after all those years of being inseparable. Everyone wanted to share Tate Blue's bed. Young people and adults envied him, wished to be like him, or desired to be Tate. Girls flirted openly, boys lingered too long, and adults smiled in ways that pretended to be harmless. People noticed him everywhere we went: his ease, his masculine beauty, his money, connections, and the quiet, cool authority he carried without trying. They watched him the way they envy him. But I was the one Tate reached for when the world finally went quiet. At night, when the house settled and the noise of expectation faded, he would put his hands on me without hesitation, tugging me close as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He couldn't sleep until I was there, until my body was aligned with his, until we shared the same pillow, the same small pocket of warmth. It wasn't dramatic or rushed, it was certain, necessary. When we were young kids, Tate and I shared the same twin bed, one large pillow, and a warm blanket each night. We were like two brothers who enjoyed being near each other while we slumbered. Talia called it cute and heartwarming. She tucked us into bed every night, and when Uncle Joey came to visit us on holidays or on birthdays, he would tuck us in. Tate would not let me out of his sight. I was his water, the thing he reached for without thinking, the thing he panicked without when it wasn't there. If I drifted too far, even by accident, he followed. If I forgot myself and moved away physically, he would catch me by the wrist, by the sleeve, by the quiet gravity he carried, and pull me back without a word. It was never rough, never angry, just instinctive, as if distance itself were a threat he refused to tolerate. Tate's presence in Los Angeles was like a magnet, pulling eyes from every corner of the city. Even now, at 18, he struts down Sunset Boulevard in those signature black shades that hide his piercing hazel eyes and curly black hair, a tailored black shirt unbuttoned just enough to reveal the sculpted lines of his chest, clinging to his broad shoulders and tapering to his narrow waist. His pants, always slim, always expensive, hugged the powerful swell of his thighs and the unmistakable bulge at his crotch, swaying with each deliberate step that screams confidence. He knows exactly how to shift his hips, letting the fabric strain against the thick outline of his 9-inch cock, teasing anyone who dares to look. And they all look. Women bite their lips, men shift uncomfortably, envy twisting in their guts because Tate owns every inch of his body, flaunts it like a weapon. I remember the first time I saw him like that, years after we met back when we were teens, him at 15 and me trailing behind like a shadow. He'd come out of his room in nothing but those low-slung jeans, the zipper half undone, his abs rippling under tan skin as he stretched, cock heavy and semi-hard against the denim. "What do you think?" he'd ask, smirking, knowing damn well what I thought. I'd stammer something stupid, my heart pounding, my own dick twitching in my pants, but he'd just ruffle my blonde hair like I was his most important buddy in the world, oblivious to the fire he lit in me. That night I heard him through the wall moans, the slap of skin on skin, his gasps turning to screams as he fucked himself through another hand job, his grunts deep and animalistic. I jerked off to it, imagining it was me bent over, his strong hands gripping my hips, his thick shaft slamming into my ass until he flooded me with hot cum. But morning came and it was back to brotherly pats on the back. Over the years nothing changed. Tate's conquests piled up like trophies, models in his car, actors on their knees sucking him off in club bathrooms, even older girls from the industry who'd drop everything for a taste of what Tate offered. I'd watch from the sidelines, nursing my drinks at parties, my eyes locked on the way he'd pin a woman against the wall, his fingers digging into her thighs as he thrust up into her pussy, making her cry out. His body was a clothed machine of pleasure, those veined forearms flexing, his clothed ass clenching with each powerful drive, sweat glistening on his neck. His body was beautiful and hot, but I wanted him, the real Tate, not the version everyone else saw. I've never actually seen Tate fuck a girl in the nude, but I had heard him hump girls at a distance, but never had seen the full display or what they called Tate doing his best work. The boy who was kind to me and let me share his blanket at night, everyone wanted him, and he gave it freely but never to me. Tate saw our relationship as something sacred, quietly steady, built from years of shared history rather than anything romantic. To him, it wasn't something to be defined by passion or blurred by expectation. It was something simpler and, in his eyes, something more enduring, a bond rooted in trust, familiarity, and the kind of loyalty that doesn't need to announce itself. As we grew older, that understanding shaped the way he treated me. There was always respect in it, an unspoken agreement that what we had didn't need to become anything else to matter. It existed in the small, consistent ways we showed up for each other, in the comfort of knowing the other person would still be there when everything else changed. Talia used to smile when she saw us together, calling it heartwarming, like she recognized something rare in it. Uncle Joey would visit on holidays, bringing his own easy warmth into the room, treating us both with the same familiar care he always had. Those moments didn't define what Tate and I were, they simply sat around it like proof that our connection had been seen and known for a long time. But as adulthood settled in, what we had stopped being about was shared routines or childhood habits. It became quieter than that, more deliberate, less about proximity and more about understanding. "You're special, I only fuck people I don't care for. You're the love of my life, Noe, I could never do that to you," Tate would say whenever I asked what we were. He'd respond with a warm smile, pulling me into a hug that pressed his hard chest against mine, his cologne mixing with the faint musk of recent sex. It killed me, loving the affection but craving the physical intimacy, the way he'd claim me completely if he only wanted to. I've loved him since I was 8 years old in 1976, and some days it feels like a quiet ache I can manage, and other days it feels like it's eating me alive from the inside. We met at preschool and hit it off immediately. Then I became a fixture in his life. It wasn't a mere crush on my part, but a raving, throbbing drive which Tate hadn't a clue existed. He had that X factor, which is partly why I waited half of my life for him to notice me as more than a mere childhood buddy. Every year on my birthday I make the same wish. Not for money, not for success, not even for love in the abstract way people talk about it. I wish that Tate would notice me, not just as whatever we were, not as the boy who followed him everywhere, who slept beside him, who knew his moods before he spoke. I wish that someday he would wake up and realize that the person willing to give him his whole heart had been standing right beside him all along. I had spent my entire life walking just half a step behind him, but every year the clock moved forward, birthdays came and went, and nothing changed. Tate still looked at me the same way he always had, like I was his closest confidant, his constant shadow, the one person he trusted, nothing more. At night we would take turns sleeping by the other person, our heads gently resting on each other's bare chests. This was a form of intimacy that everyone in Lowe's Angels desired from Tate, but I was the one he chose. He would rake his fingers through my blonde hair, combing each strand with his hand. He would kiss the side of my temple and tell me to go to sleep while he would watch over me and keep me safe. At 18, I thought the problem was simple. I thought I was fighting for Tate. I thought I was fighting his confusion, his stubbornness, maybe his fear of what people would say. I thought I was fighting puberty, girls' hormones, and the normal chaos of growing up. I believed if I waited long enough, if I stayed loyal enough, if I loved him quietly enough, eventually he would see me. What I didn't understand then was that Tate was carrying things I couldn't see. Secrets, beliefs, fears. Worlds inside his head that I wasn't part of. I thought the obstacle between us was just his feelings, but it wasn't that simple. By the time I was older, I finally understood something that would have broken my heart if I'd known it at 18. Tate wasn't the only thing standing between us. There were forces in his life, things he believed, things he had been taught, things he was terrified of, that made whatever existed between us impossible long before either of us had the words to describe it. And I had been fighting a battle I didn't even know existed. Tate was always the normal one. He was confident, a leader, complicated, hot, cool, compulsive, funny, a perfectionist, and didn't care if people liked him. The kind of boy adults trusted instinctively. Straight, too straight to misunderstand, confident, built for attention without ever asking for it. He didn't date not because he couldn't, but because he didn't care. Wrestling, cars, winning, and planning a future that made sense to people like him were what Tate focused his attention on whenever I was around him. Girls were background noise, holes he thrusted into when he was horny. For 10 years I wrestled with him, literally, on the garage floor on the lawn, laughing and panting and letting him pin me because he loved to win and I loved being close to him. It was the safest way I knew to touch him, to be in his space without it meaning anything dangerous. He thought it was bonding, I thought it was survival. His parents knew I slept over almost every night. Everyone did. I was practically another fixture in the house, like the extra chair at the table or the shoes by the door. What they didn't know, what no one questioned, was the ritual Tate and I never outgrew. We'd started doing it when we were kids, back when it felt like an adventure instead of a secret. Back when love didn't have teeth yet. By the time I was older, it wasn't a crush anymore. It was something louder. He'd fall asleep immediately, warm and solid beside me, breathing steady like the world made sense. I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, heart racing, body betraying me in ways I didn't ask for and didn't want. Ashamed of it, terrified he'd notice. Even more terrified that he wouldn't. I never touched him in any way I'd dreamt of privately. Never crossed a line he could see. I carried it all quietly because wanting the person you walk beside each day, wanting someone who will never want you back, feels like a crime with no witnesses and no defense. And the worst part? He trusted me completely. That's what still hurts the most. He had no idea what he did to me. No idea how every look, every careless touch, every laugh sent a current through my body so sharp it sometimes felt like pain. Being around him was like standing too close to a live wire, exhilarating, dangerous, impossible to step away from once you'd learned how it felt. 10 years of it, 10 years of pathetic pinning and silent want. And somehow that longing didn't weaken our bond, it forged it, made it strange and intense and unlike anything else either of us had. We were closer than most brothers, closer than some twins. We knew each other's habits, moods, and fears. I had seen him with less than shorts on and wondered when and who would get the privilege. When we touched, wrestling, shoving, hands clasped in some half-forgotten childhood way, I always knew exactly what it meant to him. Consistency, platonic intimacy, proximity. I knew in middle school that what we were wasn't friendship or anything society labeled. I'd never seen our connection replicated by adults or kids. It wasn't romantic or anything else, especially platonic. I could never figure out what I was to Tate. That was the line, bright, unmoving. Tate was possessive of me in a way he wasn't with anyone else. Jealous when I drifted, watchful when other people had my attention. He needed me and he never hid that, but he didn't understand the language he was speaking. He didn't know that his jealousy felt like devotion to me. That his refusal to share me was the closest thing to romance he ever offered. He thought it was normal, I thought it was everything. His parents treated me like a second son. Their house wasn't just a place I stayed, it was home, a family I didn't have, a freaking mansion, a refuge from the trailer, from my mother's drinking, from the smallness of my own life. At their table I belonged. In Tate's room I existed in a space that felt chosen. He let me sleep on the right side of the bed, the best side of his mattress, because I slept better there. His hands lingered on my shoulders, brushed over my feet, rested along my back, cupped my cheeks, traced the curve of my temple, and wove through my hair. Every touch was deliberate, reverent, like he was memorizing every inch of me, memorizing me. Tate worshipped me. He stared at me like I was some god, like I was the center of the universe, and only he had the privilege to see me. Of course I noticed. I could feel the weight of his attention, the quiet insistence in his gaze. But his love didn't end there. He loved everything about me, my body, my mind, the way I moved, the way I spoke. He adored my goofy facial expressions, my stupid questions, the way my mouth smiled, my voice, my thoughts, and my personality. Every detail, every imperfection, every little thing I didn't even know about myself, he cherished. And when I was scared or vulnerable, when I said something sentimental, his adoration became almost unbearable. He would press kisses to my temple, soft, grounding, and protective, to my cheeks, lingering, claiming without taking. And he loved to kiss my fingers as if they were sacred extensions of me, as if the tips of my hands deserved worship. Each gesture left me trembling, not from desire but from the sheer force of his devotion. Being with him, feeling his love, was like standing in a storm that wrapped me, held me, consumed me. I wasn't just cared for, I was treasured, revered, and worshipped, and every touch, every gaze, every quiet kiss reminded me that Tate's love was his to give, constant and unrelenting, and I was at the center of it. Tate's love for me was unlike anything I had ever been able to compare it to. I knew in theory what relationships were supposed to look like. Kids my age had friends they laughed with at school, classmates they drifted toward and away from, families that held them in one way or another, and later on, the beginnings of romantic connections that were usually awkward, shifting, and uncertain. I understood all of that. I could see it in other people's lives like a map I had been shown but never truly walked. But what I had with Tate didn't sit anywhere on that map. It wasn't just that we were close. It was as if we seemed to exist as if the rest of the world was something happening at the edges of us, not between us. There was a tether, something invisible but constant, that pulled us back into each other no matter what else changed around us. I would notice it in the smallest things, the ease of silence, the instinct of knowing where the other was without looking, the way distance never really felt like distance when it came to him. I knew what I felt, I could name it in parts. There was love there, deep, consuming, the kind that made everything else feel secondary. Sometimes it felt romantic, sometimes it felt like something older than romance, something more essential, like we had been placed into each other's lives and simply never corrected course. Even when I tried to define it differently, it kept returning to him in the same shape. But Tate's side of it was harder to name. It wasn't friendship, at least not in the simple sense I saw in other people. It wasn't family, though it carried some of that steadiness and assumption of permanence. And it didn't always behave like romance either, not in a way I could recognize or explain to anyone else. It didn't follow the usual rules. It didn't need an explanation to continue existing. What he gave me felt like something more absolute than categories, like I wasn't a role in his life so much as a fixed point in it. As if my presence wasn't chosen repeatedly but assumed, built into the structure of how he moved through the world. That was what made it so difficult to understand. Because most relationships I saw around me came with edges, boundaries, definitions that kept them from spilling into everything else, but what we had didn't stay contained. It blurred outward. It shaped how I saw myself, how I measured safety, and how I understood belonging. And still, even now, I can't fully decide what it was. Only that it was real. And that it didn't behave like anything else I've ever known. Tate's affection for me felt, at the time, like something that didn't match the world I thought I understood. Most boys around us seemed to learn early how to hold themselves back. There were rules that didn't need to be spoken aloud, how close you could stand, how long you could look at someone, what kind of touch was acceptable before it became something people commented on. Even warmth had boundaries. Even friendship had a kind of invisible distance built into it. So I learned to read those distances as normal. And then I knew Tate. With him, those boundaries didn't seem to hold in the same way, not in a loud or deliberate defiance of them, but in a quiet absence of hesitation. He didn't seem to measure his closeness before offering it. He didn't step back when something became emotionally direct. The space between us didn't feel carefully managed, it just felt inhabited. That difference made everything feel more significant than I knew how to explain. A hand resting too long, a presence that didn't drift away when silence settled, moments that in other contexts might have been rare or carefully hidden but with him felt ordinary enough to stop questioning. At the time, I interpreted that through the only lens I had available, that what we had was unlike anything else, unlike what other boys experienced, unlike what was typical or expected. It felt separated from the rest of the world, as if it existed under different rules entirely. But looking back, I can see something else in it too. Not a separate category of love, but a connection that grew large enough in my life to define how I understood closeness at all. When one relationship becomes the main place you learn emotional language, it can start to feel like the only language that exists. And so Tate didn't just feel close. He felt like the measure of closeness itself. Tate was physically expressive in a way that made him hard to ignore. He didn't hold himself back from closeness, and he didn't seem to treat affection as something to ration. With me, that openness often came with a kind of intensity, an urgency to stay near, to remain central in each other's attention, to resist anything that created distance between us. Over time, I became aware that he didn't like interruptions to that connection. Not just in the obvious sense of wanting time together, but in the subtler reactions too, the way his mood would shift when attention moved elsewhere, or when something else started to take up space between us. At the time, I read that as important, as meaning, as proof that what we had mattered in a way nothing else did. I didn't yet have the distance to ask what it meant for a relationship to feel like it needed protecting in that way, or what it meant when closeness came with resistance to outside space. What I knew was simple: when Tate was focused on me, it felt absolute, and when he wasn't, it felt like something had moved, even if nothing visible had changed. Even when he wasn't speaking, there was a seriousness to him, a kind of weight in the way he moved through the day, like his thoughts were always slightly ahead of the moment he was in. I remember noticing that early on, before I had the language for it. He could be present, even attentive, but still feel distant in a way I couldn't quite explain. People like Uncle Joey were the closest thing I saw to him relaxing. With him, there was a familiarity that softened something in Tate, like a door opening just a little. It wasn't constant, but it was there, brief moments where he seemed less guarded, less tightly held together. And then there was I. Somehow, with me, that softness didn't just appear in fragments, it became the version of him I saw most often. He was gentler with me in ways I didn't fully know how to interpret at the time. Not loud or performative, but steady and practical, small acts that added up into something that felt like care. He paid attention to things I didn't always say out loud. If I were hungry, he'd make sure I ate first. If I was uncomfortable, he adjusted the space around me without making it a question. If I were cold, he didn't hesitate to pull me closer or make sure I had warmth before thinking of his own. At the time, I didn't separate those actions from who he was in general. It felt like I was seeing the real version of him, one that only appeared in certain relationships under certain conditions. Looking back, I understand a little more about how people can become different versions of themselves depending on who they're with and what role they fall into in each relationship. But in that moment, I only knew what I felt, that with me, Tate seemed to soften in a way I didn't see anywhere else. And because I didn't see it elsewhere, it felt like it belonged only to us. Tate was never happy. He was always solemn, and he could pout, carrying that same steady seriousness with him like it was part of his nature rather than something he chose. Even in moments where other kids might have been loud or careless or easily amused, Tate seemed contained, like he was always holding something in or thinking one step deeper than everyone else around him. But when I entered his life, he became happy, kind, and tender, and he wasn't like that with anyone else except maybe Uncle Joey. There was a shift in him that didn't feel loud or sudden, but it was noticeable in the way his presence seemed to soften around me, like something in him had found a place to settle instead of staying guarded. Tate always had a soft spot for Uncle Joey, but when it came to me, Tate was a teddy bear, soft, sweet, and kind. He thought more about my feelings and comfort than he did about his own needs. If I was hungry, he would serve me first. If I were thirsty, he would pour me a drink of water first, and if I were cold, he would pull me to him during the night and wrap a blanket around me to keep us warm. Tate was a devoted worshiper. Every glance he gave me carried a weight, a fire, a relentless intensity. His eyes didn't just see me, they searched me, examining every gesture, every word, every moment, as if trying to find proof I might leave. And if there was even the smallest hint of hesitation in me, I could see it flare in his gaze, a mixture of fear, possessiveness, and unyielding devotion. He adored me in ways no girl or anyone ever had from a man. Every movement I made, every laugh, every blink, every careless tilt of my head was treasured by him. I could feel it in the small touches, the brush of his hand against my shoulder, the way he would softly cradle my hair, the way he lingered near me without reason, like proximity itself was a reward. And Tate rewarded my presence and loyalty in ways I hadn't expected. He couldn't stop buying me things, snacks I liked, books he thought I'd enjoy, or small trinkets he picked up and said reminded him of me. Sometimes it was food, simple things from the corner store or the bakery just because he knew I liked them. Other times it was gifts, carefully chosen or meticulously planned. Each one was a declaration of his undying affection for me. His actions screamed, "I notice you, you matter, you belong here." I began to notice a pattern. The more attentive, present, and loyal I was, the more fiercely he adored me. It wasn't manipulation, it was obsession, devotion, and worship. And I couldn't look away. I couldn't help but notice the power in his attention, how it made me feel both cherished and completely owned. Tate's love wasn't just soft, it was unwavering. It demanded nothing from me, yet it made me aware of everything I gave him simply by existing in his presence. And the more he gave, the more intense it became, until it wasn't just love. It was fire, hunger, possession, and worship all at once, and I was the center of it. Tate protected me like I had once saved his life, though I hadn't. In his mind, every insult thrown by bullies, every homophobic slur was a debt he needed to repay. He moved through the world as if my safety, my comfort, my dignity were entirely his responsibility, and he carried it with a kind of fervor that made it impossible to ignore. No one could touch me without feeling the weight of his presence. A shove in the hallway, Tate was there before it landed. A cruel word whispered behind my back. He was already stepping in, fire in his eyes, fists tight and ready to defend me. And all the while he would shake his head afterward, muttering almost to himself, "You deserve better. I'll pay you back for every second someone's made you feel less than perfect." He never doubted me, not once. In Tate's eyes I could do no wrong, never tell a lie, and never misuse his trust. I was honest, untouchable, untarnished, a kind of angel he had the fortune to witness. He would say it sometimes, softly, when he thought I wasn't looking, "You're the best thing I've ever seen in my line of vision." It wasn't just words. It was in the way he watched over me, the way his hands lingered on my shoulders, the subtle brush of his fingers through my hair when I was tense, the protective flare in his gaze when someone dared approach me with ill intent. Being around Tate was like being enveloped in a shield forged from obsession, devotion, and awe. And I always noticed. I noticed how he never wavered, never doubted, never hesitated. Even in the smallest moments, holding the door for me when no one else would, walking a little closer when we passed someone who might taunt me, buying me a snack just because he saw I liked it. Every act was a repayment of a debt only he could see, a constant testament to his love. Tate's love wasn't casual, it wasn't soft. It was a fire that roared quietly behind every gesture, every gaze, every touch, and I was at the center of it all, untouched, untouchable, and worshipped. Even as seniors, Tate held my hand everywhere we went, like it was a tether between us that no one else could sever. Hall monitors, teachers, even strangers, none of them mattered. Their eyes, their disapproval, their whispers, they only fueled the fire behind his grip, made him squeeze my hand just a little tighter. Throughout the day, he mouthed, "I love you," without a sound, his lips moving only for me to see. In the cafeteria, in the hallways, in quiet classrooms where the adults were supposed to enforce rules, he didn't care. He didn't need anyone else to understand it. It was ours, his devotion displayed openly, recklessly, like a banner of worship. Tate never said those words to anyone else. Not his family, not his peers, not to anyone, not once. To everyone else he was stoic, emotionless, cold, unflinching, and fiery, but careful. But with me, everything was bare, raw, tender, and constant. His love, his possession, his adoration, all of it centered on me, visible in the grip of his hand, in the steady gaze of his eyes, in the silent confession of his lips. And I noticed, of course I noticed, because it wasn't just words, it was every movement, every glance, every risk he took just to make me feel it. His love claimed me, protected me, celebrated me, and it was the most consuming, overwhelming thing I had ever felt. Tate was my protector. He didn't burn for me, didn't ache to make me his. Didn't want to claim me romantically or sexually or risk anything, or let the world see us as more than boys who'd grown up tangled together. During the 14 years we knew each other, he never once crossed that line, not because he was cruel, but because it simply wasn't there for him. That absence was loud enough to keep me waiting, hopping, and convincing myself that closeness could someday turn into desire if I stayed long enough. That's why I stayed. Because if you haven't met Tate Blue, haven't felt the gravity of him, the way he fills a room, the way he makes you feel chosen even when he's choosing something else, you wouldn't understand how easy it was to mistake being needed for being loved, and how hard it was to finally admit they were not the same thing. God, Tate, if you only knew how I'd surrender everything for that. One night, 1 hour, one life, your cock stretching me open, your breath hot on my neck as you rut into me as you do them. But you don't, you never will, and that platonic love, it's the sweetest torture, keeping me hooked, desperate, forever on the edge. People noticed, they joked about it, teased him for hovering, and asked if I was his shadow. Tate never denied it. He just stayed close, always orienting himself toward me, always making sure I was within reach. His world recalibrated around my presence, and I learned to measure rooms by how far I could go before I felt the pull of him drawing me back. With Tate, closeness wasn't a preference, it was a necessity. And without ever saying it out loud, he taught me that being needed could feel a lot like being loved. Tate was intense in his platonic possessiveness. It wasn't loud or theatrical, but it was absolute. Children tried to wedge themselves between us, adults tried to redirect him to separate us to dilute whatever they sensed was too close, too singular. It never worked. Tate would push them away without hesitation. Stepping in front of me, pulling me closer, reasserting the boundary with his body and his will. He didn't explain himself, he didn't apologize, he simply chose me over and over with a certainty that made interference feel pointless. Our connection wasn't something he defended with words, it was something he enforced with proximity. And standing there, drawn back into his orbit every time, I learned that being claimed like that could feel both overwhelming and impossibly safe. During the day, people assumed we were inseparable out of habit. They joked about us, raised eyebrows, and made comments that hovered between curiosity and knowing. "You two are always together," they'd say. Tate never corrected them, he never explained. He just stayed close, shoulder brushing mine, stride matching mine, an unconscious claim that made others pause before stepping too near. What no one saw was how much of him belonged to the quiet, how he softened only with me, how his confidence dissolved into something fragile the moment the lights went out and he needed to be sure I was still there. I learned the rhythm of his breathing, the way he slept more heavily when I was close, the way his hand would search for me in the dark and still the instant it found my wrist or the hem of my shirt. Everyone wanted Tate Blue, but I was the one he came apart with, I was the one he trusted with his nights. And somehow, without ever nomming it, we built a life inside that bed, one shaped by closeness, by habit, by a love that didn't need permission to exist, even if it never asked to be spoken aloud. I shared a bed with my favorite person in the world, Tate Blue, for 20 years, and for most of that time I told myself it meant nothing. Not in the way people usually mean it, not in the way anyone outside our world would see it. It was, at first, just sleep. Just two bodies learning the geography of night, backs turned, feet tangled, breaths sinking in the dark. I learned the sound he made when he drifted off, the quiet lift and fall of his chest, the way his hand would twitch for balance as he shifted. I learned the pressure of his presence, the way it anchored me in ways I didn't understand at the time. People whispered about it, neighbors, cousins, even older kids in our circle. They share a bed, they'd ask, eyebrows raised. After all these years, their voices carried judgment, curiosity, disbelief, and even envy. I think they assumed it was indulgent or improper, that it was unusual in the simplest way possible. And in their world maybe it was, but for us it was necessity, it was comfort, it was safety. The bed wasn't about love as the world defines it. It was about belonging, about a constancy that neither of us could or wanted to explain. People started calling me Tate's pet or Tate's boy, whispers that followed me down the hall, cruel little nicknames that made the air feel heavier every time someone spoke to them. I tried to ignore it, but they stung. And then there was the day Tate snapped. Some guy in the cafeteria, smirking, cocky, thinking he was clever, muttered it just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Tate's boy, huh, bet he's yours, all yours at night, huh." Before I could react, Tate was on him. His hand shot out faster than I could register and his knuckles raked across the guy's face, a sharp, terrifying arc that left silence in its wake. People gasped. Teachers rushed over, shouting, but Tate didn't flinch. His eyes were fixed on me, searing, protective, and feral. I wanted to run to him, I wanted to feel safe, but I didn't. Instead, I ran to the bathroom, slamming the door behind me and collapsing against the cool tiles. I cried not just for what happened, but for the truth that gnawed at me like acid. Maybe he was right, maybe he did owe me in some way. Maybe all of this, his hands on my shoulders, his fiery gaze, the way he adored me like a god, wasn't love at all. Maybe I was just his possession, someone he used to feed his obsession, his jealousy, his territorial fire. The nicknames echoed in my mind. Tate's boy, Tate's pet. I buried my face in my hands and let the tears fall. I didn't know how to separate the part of him that worshipped me, adored me, and protected me from the part that scared me so badly I could barely breathe. I wanted to believe he loved me. I wanted to trust that none of this was just about control. But in that bathroom, crying alone, the words of the bully felt true. Maybe Tate had claimed me, and maybe I wasn't anything more than the object of his obsession. I didn't even hear him come in. I was pressed against the bathroom wall, hands trembling, tears still dripping down my cheeks. Then his arms were around me, heavy, solid, and impossible to escape. Tate hugged me close, rocking me back and forth with a rhythm that felt both soothing and possessive, like he was trying to shake the world off me. "Hey," he murmured, his voice low but warm, his arms wrapping around me. "Don't cry, Noah." I hiccuped, unable to speak. From somewhere inside his coat he pulled out a chocolate bar and pressed it into my hands. "Here," he said softly, "for the tears, sweetener for the bullshit." Before I could even thank him, his lips pressed to the tip of my nose in a quick, playful kiss. "Those barnacles are idiots," he said, nodding toward the imaginary hallways outside. pay them no mind. I sniffled again, half laughing through my sobs. If I just needed a body, he said quietly, teasing in that infuriating way of his, I'd find a convenient alternative. He paused, his warm gaze locking on mine. Noah, you're never easy or convenient. Then he laughed, soft, throaty, a sound that made my chest ache with both relief and something else I couldn't name. I felt safe, I felt worshipped, I felt utterly claimed and yet loved in a way that made every fear I'd had about him disappear, at least for a moment. Tate's love was chaotic, fiery, obsessive, and sometimes terrifying, but in that hug with the chocolate and the kiss it was also perfectly, completely his. Everyone wanted to share Tate Blue's bed. Girls lingered too long, hinting at sleepovers, boys tried to sit closer than what Tate deemed polite, and adults smiled knowingly when they glimpsed his space. People noticed him everywhere we went, drawn to him like gravity itself. They watched the tilt of his head, the casual ease with which he walked, the way he commanded attention without even trying. And yet, I was the one he reached for when the lights went out. I was the one his hands found first, tugging me close with a quiet insistence because he couldn't sleep until I was there, until my body pressed against his, until we shared the same pillow night after night. Tate was intense in his platonic possessiveness. It wasn't something he explained. It was just there in the quiet insistence of his touch, in the way he positioned himself so no one else could get close. Children, adults, anyone who tried to wedge themselves between us, he pushed them away without hesitation, without apology. His claim wasn't violent, it wasn't possessive in the way the world might imagine. It was absolutely necessary, and it was mine. I felt it in the way he adjusted his body when someone leaned too close, in the subtle repositioning of his hand to ensure it found mine, in the small, almost imperceptible movements that reinforced our bond. He was a physical touch addict, but only with me. He hated when anyone else brushed against him, when fingers reached for his hair, when casual contact threatened the space we had created together. Even in crowded rooms, he would find a way to touch me, one hand on my arm, a palm against my back, a brief brush of shoulder or hand, always enough to claim the proximity he needed to feel grounded. With him, touch wasn't indulgence, it was reassurance. It was life itself. No one dared touch Tate's hair, not even a careless hand brushing past in the hallway, not a friend trying to be playful. Anyone who tried was immediately met with a sharp string of swear words and a glare that could freeze the air. You touch this, he'd growl, voice low and dangerous, and I swear you'll regret it. He was territorial in ways that extended beyond me. His hair, like his devotion, was untouchable, sacred, a piece of him he guarded fiercely. And anyone who even thought about crossing that line quickly learned that Tate's fire wasn't just for show, yet, ironically, he let me, only me. I could run my fingers through his hair, tug at it lightly, or just brush against it as he leaned near me, and he would let it happen, sometimes even leaning into the touch, murmuring something quiet and possessive that made my chest ache. It was another way he worshipped me, another way he trusted me alone with what he protected fiercely, while the world was told to keep its distance. His hair, his space, his body, everything was his. And yet he gave it freely to me because he adored me as no one else could. I began to realize slowly that what we had was rare. Not in the way the world defines rarity, money, beauty, fame, but in the intimacy that didn't demand words. Most people drift through life tethered to routine or polite distance. Tate and I didn't have that. We built our world in the space between breaths and heartbeats, in shared warmth, in a quiet claim that required no one else to validate it. We were constant for each other, and I came to understand that constancy was fragile, that our closeness, our safety, was invisible only as long as no one noticed, and the world began to notice. People whispered more openly. Teachers, friends, and neighbors. Sometimes it was curiosity, sometimes it was judgment, sometimes it was envy. I began to see the subtle glances, the knowing smiles, the way strangers would pause just a second too long when Tate and I walked past. And Tate noticed too. He bristled at the slightest brush from anyone else. He pulled me closer when I drifted, tightened his grip if someone dared to enter our space. He never explained, he never justified himself. He simply adjusted, recalibrated, and reasserted what his words were without. And I let him. Because letting him claim me, protect me, keep me close, it was part of what made us who we were. Even as I understood the rarity of our bond, there was fear creeping in. That others could see it, misinterpret it, and try to take it from us. That what had been safe in darkness could feel dangerous in daylight. I could feel it in the way neighbors lingered at the edge of our yard, in the faint buzz of gossip at school, in the whispers of those who thought it was unusual, unnatural, or wrong. And yet, nothing could touch the truth of what we had. I had long ago stopped thinking about boundaries as the world defined them. With Tate, proximity was survival, reassurance, and intimacy. He kept at least one hand on me at all times, and when he couldn't, he found some way to bridge the distance. A brush of the arm, a touch of the shoulder, a small hand resting briefly against mine, enough to remind both of us that we belonged together, that we were present, that we were safe. And when fear or worry tried to creep in, he would hug me, go quiet, press his lips gently to my temple, to the hair and skin beneath, and make the world shrink until it contained only him and me. It was instinctive, it was unspoken, it was so rare that I didn't even have a word for it until I realized others were noticing. Then it became terrifying. To share something so complete, so private with someone so magnetic was to invite scrutiny, envy, and misunderstanding. Yet every glance from the outside only reinforced our closeness. Every whispered comment, every sideways smile, every envious glare made him hold me tighter, made me lean closer. It was ours, fragile and defiant, a secret claimed in the spaces where the world thought it had no right to see. I remember the summer of 1983 in Los Angeles like it was etched into my skin, the air thick with humidity and the kind of suburban boredom that bred gossip. Tate was 15, all gangly limbs starting to fill out with muscle, his face already sharp with that defiant edge that made my stomach twist even back then. The neighbors had clustered at the wrought iron gates of the Blue Estate one afternoon, Mrs. Hargrove with her pearl necklace clutched tight, old Mr. Ellis pretending to check his mailbox, and a gaggle of bored housewives whispering behind manicured hands. They weren't there for the scenic view, they were there for him, eyes lingering on the way his tank top clung to his chest after mowing the lawn, sweat tracing paths down his neck. 15-year-old Tate caught it all, his jaw clenching as he wiped his brow, the sneer twisting his lips. "They only want my body or the money," he muttered to me later, voice low and bitter like he'd swallowed glass. But in the moment he didn't back down, he owned it. "Hey," he bellowed, striding right up to the fence, his voice cracking just a hair but laced with fury. The group froze, stares snapping to him like he'd lit a fuse. "Take a photo, it'll last longer, pervs." Before anyone could blink, his hands yanked at his belt, pants dropping to his ankles in one reckless shove. There he stood, bare from the waist down, his young cock hanging heavy between his thighs, balls loose in the heat, the soft length twitching slightly under their shocked gazes. "No underwear, of course." Tate never bothered with that shit. The woman gasped, one hand flying to her mouth while another fumbled for her camera, but he just stood there, hips cocked, letting the sun hit every inch. His privates on full display, unashamed, the faint trail of dark hair leading down from his navel like an invitation he didn't care to extend. Mr. Ellis sputtered something about indecency, but Tate laughed, sharp and mocking, before hauling his pants back up and flipping them off as he stormed inside. I didn't look at his body but gazed at the ground as he stared at me, smiling because I had the decency not to stare. That was Tate, no filters, no apologies. He'd seethe about the stares the way they reduced him to his family's wealth or his budding physique, but he'd weaponize it every time, turning vulnerability into a fuck you. And alone with me? Forget shame. Hundreds of times I'd seen him strip without a second thought, clothes shedding as if the clothing offended him. In his room, the door barely clicked shut before his shirt was over his head, jeans kicked aside, leaving him gloriously naked, cock swinging free as he flopped onto the bed or against the wall. I'd watch, pulse racing, as he lounged there, legs spread casually wide, one hand absently scratching his balls while he ranted about whatever pissed him off that day. His body was a map I knew by heart. The freckles dusting his shoulders, the V of muscle dipping toward his groin, that thick shaft that hardened so fast under the slightest attention, veins bulging when he got worked up. "They all want something," Tate sneered, his jaw tight, eyes flashing with fury at the neighbors who dared to watch him, judge him, or think they had any claim on him. His lips twisted, a snarl half mocking, half warning. But then his gaze found me, everything changed. The fire in his eyes softened, the sharp edges of his face melting into something almost gentle, almost worshipful. That same seething intensity that made him untouchable and terrifying to everyone else became warmth, devotion, and something I couldn't name. "Except you, of course," he said, smiling just for me. I knew in that moment that his heart, every ounce of that fiery, stubborn, obsessive soul was meant for me, and yet, I also knew it wasn't mine to take, not in the way I wanted. I didn't just want him, I needed him. I needed his entire heart, his full devotion to be mine, but that wasn't a want. It was a truth I couldn't force, a hunger I couldn't speak aloud. Tate didn't know. He didn't know that my need for him went beyond admiration, beyond comfort, and beyond being cherished. I wanted all of him, every fiery, obstinate, and worshipful piece of him. And I ached silently, knowing that even though he had chosen me above the world, his heart remained his own, untouchable, even as he gave me everything else. Over the years, the whispers faded into background noise. Adults stopped asking questions, children stopped starring, but the intensity never diminished. Even now, decades later, when people comment on our closeness or joke about it, Tate just tightens his hand around mine, tilts his head, and lets me feel the weight of his claim. The bed, the hands, the pillow, the quiet lips on hair, they're the language we learned long before the world noticed or could intervene. Every day I realize how rare this bond is. Not everyone gets someone like Tate, a person whose presence regulates fear, whose insistence on proximity creates safety, whose instinctive physical affection reminds you again and again that you are not alone. Everyone wanted him. Everyone wanted to claim a part of him. And yet he found me and he held on to me, and for 20 years I knew what it meant to be chosen, to be protected, to be needed. And even now, when the world watches, when people murmur or speculate that closeness continues, I feel it in the small, constant gestures. The brush of his fingers against my arm, the way he shifts to keep me within reach, the way he pulls me into the bed at night, hand seeking mine, lips brushing the temple, heartbeat syncing, breaths measured by each other. It is an intimacy that survives scrutiny, envy, and the passage of time. It is rare, it is ours, and I cannot imagine a life without it. Tate Blue was an enigma to me, not because he was complicated, but because everything about him seemed already decided. He was born into wealth and certainty, into a family whose love was loud and visible, into a future that waited for him with open arms. I envied him in ways I was ashamed to admit. I envied his parents, his last name, and the way doors seemed to open for him effortlessly. I would have given anything to belong to the Blue family, to grow up in a place where holidays meant warmth instead of tension, where love didn't have to be earned or explained. What hurt the most was that Tate never wanted the family he had. He hated family events, avoided them, and treated them like obligations instead of gifts. He didn't see what I saw: the safety, the permanence, the way being claimed by people who loved you could anchor a life. And yet, despite all his avoidance, he didn't believe in the importance of family or that it was worth fighting for. That belief lived in him quietly, stubbornly, as if he didn't know how to let it go even when he tried. I once asked Tate if I was his family, and he made a gross face, saying, "Hell no, you're important, Noah." He kissed my temple, rubbing his hands through my blonde hair, and pressed his forehead against the side of my head. Tate's words hurt, but he was always honest. Tate was so beautiful that it made people look twice and then look again. Tate's unabashed sexuality, sexual prowess, and confidence were loud. It was assumed. His charisma didn't ask for permission. Everyone wanted Tate Blue, his attention, his smile, the idea of being chosen by him. I felt it every time we walked into a room together, the way eyes followed him, the way people leaned in just a little closer. And somehow, impossibly, I was the one who got to walk beside him. I loved that feeling at every age, matching his stride, borrowing his gravity, pretending I belonged in his world just by proximity. Standing next to him made me feel visible, like maybe I wasn't so far outside the life I wanted after all. Everyone wanted Tate Blue, but I was the one who got to share his bed, and that knowledge was both a comfort and a wound, because having him so close only made the distance between our worlds feel sharper. Loving him meant touching something I had always wanted but never truly believed I deserved. It was the biggest open secret in town in 1986. Noah Lunas loved Tate Blue. Everyone assumed we were friends because no one had ever seen anything that didn't fit the parameters of casual friendship. I'm 17 years old and I'm not supposed to be doing this. That's how most of my worst ideas start. I'm halfway up the oak tree outside Tate Blue's house when the bark bites into my palms and I pause, chest tight, listening. The neighborhood is quiet. Everyone else is asleep. Everyone else is normal. I'm the one climbing a tree at midnight like it's still summer, like we're still kids and rules are optional. I seldom climb the tree, only when I want to scare Tate or throw him off balance when I stay the night. His parents know I do this. They've always known. They love me like a second son, even though my real home is outside city limits in a trailer park. The Blue house has been my second home since my dad died, and my mom has been working all the time and leaving me alone. The tree creaks softly beneath my weight. I freeze, then exhale when it holds. I've been climbing this tree for 10 years, and once my arms were strong enough to support my weight. Long enough that my body knows the path even when my head is spiraling. Tate's window glows warmly through the leaves, 3rd floor, always open, like he's expecting me. That thought twists something deep in my chest. Tate Blue, dark black hair, sharp jaw, hazel eyes, sexy and effortless confidence. The kind of guy people notice without him trying. 18, straight. So undeniably straight it almost hurts. I'm the opposite: bright blonde hair, blue eyes, quieter, sweeter, introverted, and easier to overlook. We look like opposites standing side by side, and somehow that's always worked for us. I shift onto the thickest branch and sit there for a moment, knees drawn up, steadying myself. Introductions feel too close to honesty, but if I'm telling this story, I have to start here, with the truth that I don't really know who I am yet. I just know who I want. And who I absolutely cannot have. Tate moved to town from NYC when we were 4 years old. I remember him standing in his driveway, scowling as it had personally betrayed him. My mom thought his misspelled last name, Blue, on the mailbox was funny and told me to be polite during my first sleepover at the Blue House. 13 years later, I'm still walking toward him, just differently. I climb the rest of the way up the tree and tap on the glass. Once, pause, twice. The window slides open almost immediately. "Took you long enough," Tate says, grinning. And there it is, the look, the one that drains the confidence right out of me. "Sorry," I mutter, because for some reason I always apologize to him. "Get in here before you fall." I climb through the window and land on the carpet. His room smells like laundry detergent, popcorn, and something that's just him. It always has. He stands there smiling at me with a glib look in his eye. He pulled me into an embrace and pulled me to bed as we cuddled until we fell asleep. Some things don't change. He flops onto his side of the bed, watching me like I'm interesting instead of familiar. I sit on the edge of the mattress. There's no awkwardness between us, there never has been. Since we were kids, weekends have meant movies, junk food, and falling asleep right here. Now it's still that, mostly. Tate cues up a movie without asking. He never asks, he just assumes I'll stay, that I belong here. He rolls onto his side and pats the mattress behind him. "Come on." I hesitate for half a second too long, then slide under the blanket. He shifts back automatically, fitting against me like muscle memory. His arm drapes over my waist. His forehead brushes the back of my neck. My breath catches. I pray he doesn't notice. This is how we watch movies and sleep. Has been for years. Ever since that first sleepover at his house when we were 4, Tate spoons me without a second thought, warm and solid and completely unaware of what it does to me. I stare at the wall, heart pounding. "Your heart is racing," he says, smiling. I remember the first time I said that to him all those years ago when he was nervous about me being so close to him while we were asleep. I tell myself it's a phase, that wanting him doesn't mean anything permanent, that I'll grow out of it. But then he shifts closer, his arm tightening slightly, and jealousy flares sharp and ugly in my chest. Because someday he'll fall in love, and it won't be with me. "Tate," I whisper before I can stop myself. "I'm half asleep." "Never mind." He tightens his arm, protective and thoughtless. "You're weird," he murmurs fondly. "Yeah, I know. I've been invisible my entire life, even in high school. Tate was popular in elementary school, then bilayed out of cliques to be with me. He saw me on the bench, rejected from games, and refused to join a club or play sports if I was on the sidelines. One bully meanly called me Invisible Boy due to how no one wanted me around, and my butt was always sitting next to the bench because no one chose me for teams. I learned how to sleep perfectly still sometime in middle school, when sleepovers stop meaning cartoons and start meaning awareness of space, of bodies, of how much room Tate takes up without realizing it. Tate smells like lemon-flavored mints. He has this obsession with lemon, tart candy, and lemon flavoring. He puts it on all his food, and it's been going on for years. Our mom makes jokes about Tate's taste in food. It's a family inside joke. Tate is straight. I know that the same way I know gravity exists, which makes the fact that we share a bed every weekend feel like a quiet joke the universe is playing on me. He sleeps heavily, always has. Once he's out, nothing reaches him. His arm is warm around my middle. His breathing is slow and even. This is normal to him. We're really close. No big deal. To me, every touch lands differently. Tate shifts in his sleep, face pressing briefly into the back of my neck. Not intentional, just warmth. My thoughts scatter. I don't move. I barely breathe. He tightens his arm reflexively and settles again, safe and oblivious. I lay there for a long time after that, caught between wanting to pull away and never wanting this to end. Even when Tate slept, some part of him was always touching me, a hand resting lightly on my arm, a foot hooked around my ankle, sometimes just his shoulder pressed against mine beneath the blankets. It was like he needed the contact, even in sleep. Like some part of him had to know I was still there. If I shifted too far away during the night, he would move closer without even waking up. At 14, I started to notice how unusual it was. One night I woke suddenly, pulled out of sleep by a strange feeling of pressure and movement. My eyes opened slowly in the dark, still foggy with sleep, and it took me a second to understand what I was seeing. Tate was on top of me, not in a sexual way, more like he had thrown himself over me. His body covered mine protectively, his stomach pressed against my chest and abdomen, and our bedroom door was open. That alone confused me. The door was never open at night, ever. Tate was obsessive about that. He always closed it, locked it, and checked it before going to bed. It was one of those habits he never explained but never forgot either. But that night it stood open in the darkness. Tate was awake. I could feel his pulse through his chest where it pressed against me, racing so fast it startled me. His heart was pounding and his breathing came in short, uneven bursts as he had just run a long distance. His arms were wrapped around me tightly, almost like he was shielding me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could feel how tense he was, every muscle in his body tight, alert. His head was turned toward the doorway, watching it. Slowly, after a few seconds that felt much longer, Tate eased his weight off me. Slowly, after a few long seconds, he seemed to realize I was awake. His grip loosened slightly and he carefully eased his weight off my body. Without saying a word, he stepped off the bed and walked across the room. The door closed. I heard the quiet click of the lock sliding into place. When he came back to bed, he pulled the blanket up to my chin, adjusting it gently like he used to when we were little. His movements were slower now, controlled, but the tension hadn't left his body. "There was a burglar," Tate whispered. "I had a nightmare and saw a burglar outside our door. He's gone now. Go back to sleep," he murmured. I wanted to ask him what had happened, why he'd been so scared, why the door had been open, but something in his expression stopped me, so I closed my eyes again. I eventually drifted back to sleep, but Tate didn't. By morning, Tate will grin like always, nothing will change. I slip out of bed quietly before dawn, padding down the hall to the bathroom just to breathe, to steady myself, to put distance between my feelings and his sleep. When I come back, Tate is still sprawled across the bed. I slide in carefully, leaving space. It doesn't last. Without waking, he rolls toward me again, arms settling around my waist as it belongs there. I close my eyes, jaw tight. This is what breaks me, not loudly, not all at once, but quietly, in the way I keep loving someone who doesn't know he's being loved. Morning will come, Tate will smile, and I'll smile back, carrying the truth like I always do, carefully, privately, and alone. Anyone who has ever loved their best friend or childhood buddy for 10 years understands this kind of pain. The silent kind, the kind that doesn't bleed or bruise but lives in the background of everything. I'm invisible to Tate, not in the way that means he doesn't see me at all, but in the way that hurts worse. He sees me, he loves me, just not the way I love him. It hurts when he sees me as a mere buddy, but if you've never been Tate's special person, you wouldn't understand why being around him was enough. Tate loves me as his buddy. He doesn't pine for me. He doesn't lie awake wondering if I'm thinking about him. He doesn't read meaning into every touch, every laugh, every shared silence. I do. No one ever understood what Tate and I were. We weren't friends, brothers, or lovers. People watched us too closely, like our closeness was a problem they needed to solve. There were whispers in hallways, looks held a second too long, and questions asked with fake innocence. I didn't notice most of it at first. I was too busy just being with him, but Tate always did. He saw the way people stared, heard the rumors forming, and still stayed exactly where he was, beside me, using his hand to always keep contact with my body. He never tried to explain to us, never softened what we were to make others comfortable. That silence confused people more than any answer ever could. "Tate, are we friends?" I asked again when we were 13. We were lying in bed like always, the room dim except for the soft glow of the hallway light slipping under the door. The question had been sitting in my mind for weeks, maybe months, and I couldn't hold it in anymore. Tate didn't answer right away. I felt him shift beside me, and in the quiet I heard him swallow. "No," he said finally. The word caught me off guard. I turned toward him. "What are we then?" I pushed. Tate let out a long sigh, the kind he made when he thought I was about to ask something complicated. "Noah," he warned softly. "Please," I said, almost begging, "just tell me." For a moment I thought he wasn't going to answer at all. His arm was draped across me the way it always was at night, his fingers resting loosely against my side. Then he spoke. "Ever since I was born," he said slowly, "I've hated being alone at night when it's dark and scary." His voice was quieter than usual, more honest than I had ever heard it. I don't like being on my own, my brain, it starts going places I don't want it to go, I get anxious. He paused, searching for the right words. Really anxious. I stayed still, listening. You being here helps, he continued. You make me feel less anxious. The answer confused me more than it helped. I had a friend once, Tate said finally. His voice sounded distant. And it didn't. He stopped, jaw tightening slightly. Didn't what? I asked. Tate exhaled slowly, clearly irritated with himself for even bringing it up. Anyway, he muttered, I prefer to skip friends altogether. The answer didn't make sense to me. What do you mean? I asked. If you want a friend, Tate continued, his tone flat now, find one at school. He sighed after saying it, almost like he hoped I wouldn't actually follow that suggestion. Then, under his breath, barely loud enough for me to hear, he muttered, fucking Wayne. I frowned in the darkness. I stared into the darkness, my thoughts immediately beginning to spin. I had never heard Tate mention anyone named Wayne before. Tate didn't talk about people from before me very often, almost never. Which only made the name feel heavier. My chest tightened with a strange, uncomfortable feeling. Was Wayne someone Tate had loved? The thought made my heart clench with a sudden, sharp jealousy I didn't expect. I didn't even know who Wayne was, but the idea that there might have been someone else, someone important enough for Tate to remember him like that, bothered me more than it should have. I shifted slightly beside him. Who's Wayne? I asked. Tate didn't answer right away, he just stared up at the ceiling, his jaw tightening a little. Noah, he said finally, his voice carrying that familiar warning tone, which meant he didn't want to talk about it. That only made my curiosity worse. If Wayne were just some random kid, Tate would have said so. The silence made it feel like the name mattered, as it belonged to some part of Tate's life I had never been allowed to see. And lying there beside him in the dark, I couldn't stop wondering who Wayne was and why the thought of him made my chest feel tight. Instead, he turned his head slightly away from me, clearly finished with that part of the conversation. But we're friends, I insisted. Tate was quiet again. No, but you can call it that if you want, he said after a moment. That only confused me more. Why didn't he want to call us friends? Every kid I knew had friends, best friends even, that was normal, simple, but with Tate, everything always felt different, like whatever we were didn't fit into the same categories as everyone else. We slept in the same bed every night. We spent all our time together. If one of us was somewhere, the other one was usually only a few feet away. If that wasn't friendship, then what was it? At 13, I didn't understand why the word bothered him so much. All I knew was that when Tate said it, it sounded like friend meant something small or detestable. And whatever he believed we were, it was something else entirely. And even then, at 13, I could feel there was something he still wasn't saying. Tate was really tight-lipped about his personal business, and he held everything so close to his chest. Some of our peers were louder than others. They made fun of the way Tate touched me so casually, an arm slung over my shoulders, a hand at my back, the kind of contact that felt safe and familiar. They laughed because boys our age weren't supposed to do that. Normal 18-year-old boys were supposed to flinch, pull away, or worry about being called gay. Tate didn't. He never hesitated. Never withdrew his hand just because someone was watching. And when the jokes crossed into cruelty, he stood up for me without blinking, like defending me was instinct, not a decision. The adults weren't much better. They whispered behind our backs, pretending concern when it was really judgment. They thought they knew what they were seeing, thought they understood something intimate just by observing it from a distance. Their words carried less innocence than the kids, but Tate treated them the same way by not caring. What we had wasn't fragile enough to be broken by gossip. Our bond was stronger than hallway laughter and far stronger than the quiet disapproval of people who never bothered to ask. For me, though, everything meant more than it did to him. Every touch he defended, every moment he chose me over the noise, fed the feelings I kept buried. I loved him silently, knowing how dangerous that love was, knowing it would never be returned in the way I wanted. Tate's affection was real, deep, and unwavering, but strictly platonic. The idea of anything romantic between us repulsed him, even as he held me close and made the world feel smaller and safer. And still, what we had mattered. It mattered more than the worthless words kids threw at us and more than the whispers adults thought we couldn't hear. No one understood our relationship because they were too busy trying to define it. Tate didn't need it defined and I didn't need it explained. I just needed him, standing beside me, unapologetic, proving that whatever people said behind our backs would never be stronger than the bond we shared. On Tate's 16th birthday, we were all sitting at the kitchen table finishing dinner when the phone rang. Talia stood up and answered the landline, tucking the receiver between her shoulder and ear as she listened. Then she smiled faintly and covered the mouthpiece with her hand. Tate, she said lightly, it's your NYC admirer. The reaction was instant. Tate's eyes went dark, so dark they almost looked black in the kitchen light. I watched his entire body tense beside me, his shoulders tightening, his jaw locking. Fucking Wayne hell, he whispered angrily under his breath. He pushed his chair back from the table. Excuse me, he said, though his voice sounded tight and controlled in a way that made the room feel suddenly colder. Tate walked over and took the receiver from Talia's hand. My jealousy flared in my chest. I wanted to know if this old friend was a rival or competition for Tate's affections. Hello, his tone was dangerous, flat, sharp, and nothing like the relaxed voice he used around us. There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. Tate's expression hardened. What the fuck do you want? He said quietly. Another pause. Yes, he said slowly, his jaw tightening. No, I remembered and it's done. His eyes flicked toward the floor for a second, irritation flashing across his face. Don't call my mom's landline again, call my phone next time or don't reach out ever. The receiver slammed back into the cradle with a loud crack that made everyone at the table jump slightly. For a moment, Tate just stood there, breathing through his nose like he was forcing himself to calm down. Then he turned and walked back to the table. As he sat down beside me, his expression had already shifted back to normal. He reached over and ruffled my hair casually as if nothing unusual had happened. Fucking telemarketers, he muttered. But I had been sitting right next to him, and I knew telemarketers had never made Tate's eyes go that dark before. Tate had recently had his birthday, and I was waiting a few more weeks until mine finally happened. Tate was 18, his birthday was March 23rd, while the day of my birth was April 29th. I was almost the same age as him, close enough that no one ever thought to separate us. Since we were 4 years old, we had shared a twin bed on the 3rd floor of his house, squeezed into his bedroom like it was the most natural thing in the world. To us it was normal, just sleep, just closeness, just years of habit and comfort. We grew up that way, limbs tangled, breathing in sync, never questioning it because it had always been that way. It never felt strange or wrong until other people decided it was. Tate gave me everything he had, his body, his time, and his heart, without ever focusing on sex or romance. I didn't even know what emotional intimacy was before him. I'd never had someone who listened, who cared, or who watched me and learned from me for the sheer purpose of understanding me. Then Tate came into my preschool life, all fire and energy, and suddenly it existed. We talked about everything. Big things, small things, silly things. His hobbies, my hobbies, stories from our days, moments that mattered and moments that didn't. Every conversation felt like a thread weaving us together, binding our worlds into one, and he always wanted more. Tate wanted to spend the rest of our lives wrestling on the floor, roughhousing, teasing and rolling together until we were exhausted and laughing until our stomachs ached. He never reached out to anyone else with the same intensity. He didn't make friends the way other kids did. He spent his entire childhood pursuing me, pursuing us, and shaping his world around the fact that I existed in it. It wasn't possessive in the ordinary sense. It was something else, something wild and constant, fiery and obstinate. His love was all-encompassing yet safe. His body was mine to be near, his presence mine to depend on. And for the first time I understood what it meant to be truly seen, truly cherished, without conditions, without expectations, without desire complicating it. Tate didn't just exist in my life, he defined it. Tate constantly said those 3 little words, I love you, and I always returned them sweetly, softly, in the quiet rhythm that only the two of us understood. Girls tried. They tried to reach him, to share jokes, stories, fleeting confidences, even tender moments. But Tate wouldn't, not really. His eyes would flicker with a kind of stubborn loyalty, a fire that no one else could penetrate. That's for Noah, he'd say, almost grinning, almost teasing but firm. Absolute. It wasn't cruelty, it was possession and reverence combined. He had given me his time, his trust, his attention, and he wouldn't share it. Not because he was mean, not because he was cold, but because I was the center of his world, the one person he had devoted himself to, heart and soul. Even now, as he murmured, I love you, across tables, across hallways, across quiet moments, I felt the weight of it, the devotion, the obsession, the reverence. It wasn't casual, it wasn't fleeting, it wasn't for anyone else. Tate had always been mine, and in his world nothing, not a single person, could take that from me. Over 14 years, Tate had been asked to 24 sleepovers. I only knew about the first couple of times. The first time, when he was 11, he didn't last long. He went to the other house, but he came back before the night was out, saying he got bored and wanted to come home. He didn't even sleep there. Everyone was there that evening, Tate's entire family, spread out around the long dining table like it was something sacred. His father sat at the head, composed and distant. His aunts Julia and Lydia were scattered along the sides, murmuring quietly to one another. And then there was Joey, sitting a few seats down, relaxed, watching everything like it was entertainment. Tim, Julia's husband, sat next to Joey during most dinners, and there was even one of Tate's father's business associates present, Linus, which made the whole thing feel less like dinner and more like some formal performance I hadn't rehearsed for. It was a family dinner, and I wasn't family. The realization sat heavily in my chest, especially when I thought about it. My last name wasn't Blue. I didn't belong at this table no matter how many times I'd been invited. Still, I gathered my courage. I don't even know what pushed me to speak. Maybe it was the tension or the way everyone acted like there were things I wasn't supposed to know. Whatever it was, I didn't realize I was committing a social misstep, didn't realize it until it was too late. I raised my voice just a little too loudly. "Talia, Mrs. Blue," I corrected quickly, trying to tease Tate, my voice carrying across the table more than I intended. "Who's Wayne?" The reaction was immediate. Tate choked on my expensive water glass. Water sprayed across the table as he coughed violently, gagging as it went down the wrong way. His Aunt Julia, sitting to his left, immediately reached over and smacked him hard on the back a few times. "Tate," she hissed under her breath, trying to help him regain control. But my attention wasn't on her, it was on Joey, his eyebrows lifted slightly. A flicker of interest crossing his face as he leaned back in his chair. "Who?" Joey asked casually. "Wayne," I repeated, a little more uncertain this time. Joey's gaze shifted to Tate, then slowly to Tate's father, like he was trying to piece something together, or maybe like he already knew and was enjoying the moment. "I didn't know Tate had a friend," Joey said with a smirk, his tone laced with amusement. The way he said friend made my stomach tighten, like it was a joke. Like Tate having anyone outside this table was absurd, like an alien landing in the front yard was more likely than Joey's nephew finding a new friend. For a second, no one else spoke. Then Tate's father stepped in smoothly, redirecting the conversation without even acknowledging my question. He started talking to his business associate about something dry and adult, numbers, deals, something that clearly didn't involve me. Just like that, the moment was buried. Talia smiled faintly, nodding along, already moving on like I hadn't said anything at all. Like Wayne didn't exist. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. Did I imagine it? No, I hadn't. I cleared my throat, trying to ask again, trying to pull the question back into the light. But then Tate's hand appeared on the table. It wrapped around mine, and squeezed, hard. Pain shot up my fingers instantly, sharp and unmistakable. My breath caught as I stiffened, eyes snapping to his. Tate had never intentionally hurt me or my body before tonight. I didn't think he could hurt me. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't a warning, it was a command: shut the fuck up. Tate's glare was cold, furious, like I had just done something unforgivable, something dangerous. I didn't understand, I didn't know what I'd done, but I got the message. I dropped my gaze immediately, staring down at my plate, my hand still trapped in his grip for a second longer before he finally let go. The conversation around the table continued as if nothing had happened. Voices, silverware, quiet laughter, it all blended together into something distant and muffled. I sat there silent, confused, embarrassed, trying to make sense of a question I apparently wasn't allowed to ask. After a moment I looked up again, and that's when I saw Joey. He was already watching Tate, smirking, slow, knowing. Then his eyes flicked to me and he winked, like we were sharing a secret, like he knew exactly what I had just stepped into. Then, just as easily, he looked back down at his soup and continued eating, like nothing had happened at all. 5 minutes later, Uncle Joey had moved on from his long explanation about one of his business ventures, something about merging with a conglomerate that had gone completely over my head. The table had settled again into that strange, polished rhythm of quiet eating and polite conversation. Then Joey looked back at me. He smiled. Uncle Joey was always like that, easy, charming, the kind of person who made sure I wasn't left out during family dinners or gatherings, especially since I wasn't really part of the family. Under the table, I felt his foot nudge mine lightly. I looked up. Joey turned his attention to Tate, amusement already in his voice. "Yes," he said casually, like he was picking up a thread no one else had noticed. "Tell us about Wayne." Everything stopped again. Tate choked, this time on a piece of chicken from his Caesar salad. He coughed sharply, grabbing his glass, eyes darting up for just a second before dropping again. "I don't want to talk about my private business," Tate said quickly in an angry tone, voice tight. Then he added almost automatically, "Papa says we don't talk about private family business in front of outsiders." His eyes flicked to me. Just for a second, then he went right back to his salad. The word outsiders hit harder than it should have. I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't say anything. I just sat there, hands folded awkwardly, staring down at my plate. Joey didn't miss a beat. "I think it was that blonde-haired kid," he went on lightly, as if this were all harmless curiosity. "The one who used to run around Talia and Terrence's house in New York City when you were 4 before you moved to LA. Didn't he vomit, or something like that?" Tate didn't respond, he just started eating faster, fork moving quicker, sharper, like he had somewhere else to be. "Wasn't he the one who used to sleep over all the time in your room on the floor?" Joey added, tilting his head slightly, watching him. "Smart kid if I remember right." Still nothing. Tate's plate was nearly empty now. He'd gone through his salad faster than anyone else at the table, barely chewing, barely breathing between bites. Joey leaned back slightly, still smiling. "So how come he doesn't come around anymore?" Silence, heavy, uncomfortable. Tate didn't look up, didn't acknowledge the question. He just stared at his plate like it had all the answers, even though it was already empty. Everyone else was still eating, slowly, normally, like this wasn't happening. "Uncle Joey," Tate said suddenly, cutting in, his voice tight but controlled, "aren't you going to be visiting Greece?" The shift was obvious, deliberate. Joey let it happen. "Yes," he said, smiling again as if nothing had just occurred. "I am." He glanced at me. "Would you like anything? A knick-knack maybe, something from the trip?" "I'm good," I said quickly, my voice wavering more than I wanted it to. He nodded, satisfied, and the conversation moved on. But the tension didn't. After dinner, Tate didn't even look at me, not once. Tate got up from the table, pushed his chair in a little too hard, and walked out without a word. A moment later, I heard the door upstairs slam shut. I stayed behind for a bit, pretending to help, pretending everything was normal. It wasn't. About an hour later, I heard movement upstairs again, heavy footsteps crossing the hall. Then the distinct sound of a door opening his father's study. I didn't need to be told what was happening. They were arguing about dinner, about me, about whatever Wayne was or how I had embarrassed the family during dinner, asking personal questions about rich people. The house felt tense, like it was holding its breath. Voices were muffled through the walls, low and controlled, but sharp enough that I knew it wasn't calm. Another hour passed before the study door opened again, footsteps, slower this time. Tate, he didn't come to me, didn't say anything, he just went straight to his room. The door shut, quietly this time. I followed a few minutes later, hesitant, unsure of what I'd even say. When I stepped inside, he was already in bed, covers pulled up over his head, completely still. Like he'd already decided I didn't exist. "Tate," I started softly. No response, not even a shift. I stood there for a moment, feeling stupid, out of place, like I had at the dinner table. Like I always did here, no matter how many times I was invited. He ignored me completely, and somehow that hurt more than anything he could have said. The next morning I woke up and Tate wasn't in bed. For a second I just lay there, staring at the empty space beside me, my stomach tightening with a quiet sense of dread. He's still mad. I pushed the covers back and got up, pulling on a shirt as I headed downstairs. I needed to find him, needed to apologize. In my head I kept replaying it, last night, the question, the way everything had shifted so quickly. I hadn't meant anything by it. I thought maybe it was just something embarrassing, something private, not something bad. I didn't understand why it had gone so wrong. The house was already awake when I reached the dining room. Everyone was there again. The whole family gathered around the breakfast table as if nothing had happened. Plates of waffles, syrup, fruit, normal, calm, almost too normal after the tension from the night before. And then there was Joey. He spotted me immediately. "Well, there he is," he said lightly, smiling as he reached out and pulled me down onto his lap before I could even react. Tate glared at me and stuck his tongue out at Joey. I stiffened for a second, surprised, but he just laughed softly, easy and familiar. "Relax," Joey said like it was nothing. From his pocket he pulled out a small box. "I picked this up in Amsterdam, kid," he said, handing it to me. "Thought you might like it." I blinked, a little caught off guard, and took it. "You didn't have to." "Tate said he wasn't in the mood for gifts," Joey added casually, glancing across the table, "so I figured maybe you would appreciate it instead." I hesitated for a second, then opened the box. Inside was a pair of small opera glasses, ornate, beautiful, the kind of thing that looked expensive without trying too hard. I turned it slightly in my hands, catching the light, unsure what to say. "It's really nice," I said quietly. Joey just smiled satisfied. I slipped off his lap after a moment, leaning down to give him a quick kiss on the cheek. "Thank you." Then I turned toward the table and saw Tate. He wasn't happy, not even close. He wasn't eating, just pushing his food around on his plate, barely looking at anyone. His jaw was tight, his shoulders tense, like the entire room was something he had to endure rather than be part of. "Get lost, Joey, and get out," Tate hissed. My chest tightened. I moved toward Tate anyway. Leaning down slightly, I brought my mouth close to his ear, keeping my voice low so no one else could hear. "I'm sorry, Tay," I whispered. "I didn't mean to upset you or get you in trouble. I was just joking around. I didn't know. I'm sorry." I kissed Tate's cheek, hoping that my apology and sincerity would convince Tate that I wasn't being malicious or intentionally cruel with what I had said last night. For a second he didn't react, then he sighed. The tension in his shoulders eased just a little. Without looking at me, he reached out and grabbed my wrist, pulling me down into my usual chair beside him. It wasn't gentle, but it wasn't harsh either, just familiar, like a silent decision had been made. I sat there, heart still racing, watching him out of the corner of my eye. He didn't say anything.